thank you all so much for letting me join you during this time. It's just great to be here. I've never been here at the Northwest Environmental Business Council before, but really appreciate the opportunity to do so. As I began to read over the mission of the organization, I began to realize, in a sense, how many things really overlap with the kinds of ways we like to think and work at the Murdock Trust. I read that you like science-based. I mean, that's sort of like you had me at hello. We love science kinds of things. I'll say more about that in a minute. You talked about the synergies among the different communities and members, and that's really such a deep commitment of value of the Murdock Trust, is building collaborations and partnerships and getting folks to work together. And then expanding business opportunities. That's another deep commitment of the Murdock Trust. And I loved particularly going through some of the displays, and loved all the incredible swag that you guys are giving out here. It's an amazing thing. I got nearly all my Christmas shopping done, so it was really terrific. Seriously, the first thing that I would want to say is this: thank you for your work. The Murdock Trust, and I'll say more about Jack Murdock in just a moment, but one of the things that we like to do as we work in communities, our primary area that we serve is the Pacific Northwest. And one of the things that we are regularly doing is recognizing that the communities thrive when all the different sectors of a community thrives. It's not, though, just when all of those different sectors thrive. It's actually when those sectors also learn and work together. And it builds a healthy, what we like to term a healthy ecosystem. I think that's a term you all would be very comfortable with and appreciate as well. So thank you for what you do, because business is such the foundational piece of communities and their ability to thrive and flourish. The second thing that I would do is I would say thank you for your service. When I mentioned to a few folks over the last few weeks that I was going to be coming here to speak, there were several organizations who said to me, "Oh, so-and-so from my board is a part of that group." And so I know that many of you are involved with nonprofits, serving on boards, or you've done consulting for nonprofits as they've sought to do their work, and that you all really work hard to be solution-oriented in terms of the work in communities. So thank you for that work as well. I'll give you a little tip in terms of just understanding more about the Murdock Trust, and as I was talking with Dave, and then we were talking about a couple other things. If you were the next time that you have like a professional development thing for your organization or your office, you might want to show a little video. You can get it off our website, or you can just Google Thriving Cities Video, and it'll pull up. It comes out of an institute, a research center at University of Virginia. They're just now moving to Duke University, but you can still get it there. Here's the idea behind it, and here's how it relates to the work, and then I'll build the bridge to what we're trying to do at Murdock. What the Thriving Cities video does in about 8 minutes, in a very clever and very connected kind of way, is to say just what I mentioned, and that is, in every community you have different sectors. You may have the education sector. You may have healthcare. You have business. You may have nonprofits. You have faith communities. You have creatives. And all of these different sectors, what often happens is that decision makers think, if we can get this sector to succeed, then the dominoes will all fall out and everything will succeed. But what the Thriving Cities video says is that it's really, as you begin to build a human ecology, an ecology or an ecosystem that understands not just helping each of those flourish, but helping those connect with each other. If business does not thrive, education does not thrive. If healthcare does not thrive, education does not thrive, and business does not thrive. So the kind of connections that come together in the interaction, so that might be a fun one to for you to connect with. This kind of ecosystem mentality really comes from our founder, Jack Murdock, not Rupert Murdoch. I sometimes get asked, hey, why do you guys show this on Fox News or whatever? And we're not Rupert Murdoch, that's with an H. We're Jack Murdock with a K at the end. Jack Murdock was one of the co-founders with Howard Vollum of Tektronix. And I'm sure you know Tektronix, oscilloscopes. This is a crowd that will know oscilloscopes, I would imagine. And the interesting thing about Jack Murdock is he was born in Portland, born in about 1917, and grew up, went to Franklin High School. When he was graduating from high school, his parents said, we've saved up enough money for you to go to college or to start a business. And they had about $4,000 saved up for Jack, their only child. And so Jack decided to start a business. And he founded Murdock Radio and Appliance and opened it at 18 years of age. Isn't that an amazing thing to think about? And after he had started it, about a year later, a young man walked in that was in school at the University of Portland. And he said, I'm pretty good at repairing radios and appliances. Could I work for you while I'm in college? His name was Howard Vollum. And so Howard and Jack got to be friends. Soon, World War II breaks out. And they did what so many of that generation did. They hung a sign on the door, and it said, "Gone to war." And Jack and Howard said, let's go learn everything that we can about all this stuff that's technology. And so Jack went and joined the Coast Guard, and Howard went and joined the Army, and together they both went in and learned everything they could about technology. And after they came back, realized there's this huge amount of government surplus that they could purchase and then, in a sense, cannibalize and begin to build on this idea of a portable oscilloscope. And of course, Tektronix was born. The interesting thing about that I love to tell is that they also got to be friends with a couple of other guys that had ideas about technology. And those guys decided to start their business down in California. And they kept saying to Jack and Howard, you guys move down here. And Jack and Howard would say, no, you guys move up here to the Northwest. This is where the future's going to be. And so Hewlett and Packard stayed in California, and Murdock and Vollum stayed up here, and the rest is history, as they say. What most people don't know about Jack Murdock and Howard Vollum in the early days of Tektronix is that they had a commitment to their employees to help employees who had great ideas help them to flourish. And they spun off out of Tektronix more than 300 companies, giving employees an opportunity to build their businesses internally and then launch them, and oftentimes investing in those companies and helping those to get started. And so their vision and much of the technology that has happened in this region is a result of some of the early vision of Jack and Howard to work in those kinds of ways. They had a vision for what they often called the Silicon Forest, and the idea of kind of building out this ecosystem. Well, after they finally, Tektronix went public in the 60s, Jack became overnight a multimillionaire. Never could have imagined that. And one day he was sitting in Joe's Diner in downtown Vancouver. It's still there if you want to go eat breakfast there. He was a bachelor, had never married, had no children, had no siblings, was still taking care of his mom. He and a couple of his friends were there, and one of his friends said, Jack, do you have a will? And Jack said, no. And they said, do you realize that if you die, everything you own is going to the government? And that was his worst nightmare. And so the next Monday, he was in his attorney's office and had on the back of an envelope had written this: that he wanted to leave everything that he owned, to nurture and enrich the educational, cultural, spiritual, and social life of individuals, families, and communities. And the lawyer said to him, "You've got to be much more specific than that." And he said, "No, what I'm going to do is name my 3 best friends as the trustees. They'll know to do the kinds of things that I would do." And so from the very beginning, the idea was really that human relationships are critical. Really, ultimately, that's the way things take shape, is when people decide to build those bridges and make those kinds of things happen. And so Jack, 6 months later, some of you may have even lived here at that time, but 6 months later, Jack was an amateur pilot. He was flying his float plane down the Columbia River down to see some hieroglyphics that were on a canyon wall. Landed his plane, looked at it, took some pictures. He was also an amateur photographer. Turned his plane around, and when he went to take off, a gust of wind came, and a wave came, and it flipped his plane. And he drowned. So little did he know that point of writing that will just a few months earlier, that all of a sudden the Murdock Trust would be launched. And so in 1975 is when the Murdock Trust launched. They liquidated all of Jack's estate, and they launched the Murdock Trust to serve in that mission that I mentioned earlier. And so our work is primarily in 4 different sectors, and I think you'll appreciate, because there's sectors I think you have some interest in. One is in education. That's one of our main areas that we work in. Another area is in science research and education. So just as an example, we work with all the public universities of the Pacific Northwest. We work with and we do a lot of scientific instrumentation, helping them to build out, in a sense, that ecosystem for research to be done. And then we work with all of the private undergraduate schools that do undergraduate science research, teaching people and helping people grow up and, in a sense, give consideration to scientific careers. My guess is that if I were to say, how many of you went to a private college or university, I bet there's a lot of folks here that went to one of the colleges that participate in the Murdock College Science Program. You may have even done your research at one of those labs. And then we work with high schools, public and private high schools, with a program we call Partners in Science that helps high school science teachers actually have research experiences at those private colleges and universities and at those public research universities. So that's when we think kind of an ecosystem. So education, science research, health and human services, and arts and culture. Those are really the 4 areas that we work in. Now, within the area of education and within the area of health and human services, we do have a particular interest in conservation. And so most people don't realize that the Murdock Trust is now really the only remaining group that works in all 5 states of the Pacific Northwest: Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, Alaska, and we do a few things in British Columbia. Most of the other regional funders have either zeroed back and are focusing on a particular state, or they've just, in a sense, exited doing any kind of work with the groups in those areas. But in our conservation work, it really, again, falls out into 4 or 5, 6 different areas. Natural resource protection and conservation is one. You know groups like Columbia Land Trust or Freshwater Trust or groups like that. Those are groups that we would partner with. Conservation and environmental education. So we've worked with a number of organizations that work. In fact, one of the funny things that we often say is we have worked with a lot of camps, Boys and Girls Scout camps, church camps, all sorts of different camps. In fact, we're the leading foundation installing septic systems in the Northwest. So we like to wear that badge proudly. Zoos and aquariums. If you think about zoos and aquariums, every zoo and aquarium just in the Pacific Northwest, we've worked with at one time or another. And a lot of that has to do with major exhibits, some of the redesign that's taking place in zoos and aquariums, but also in some creative ways, such as the MRI and centrifuge that's now in use at the Oregon Zoo. That was a part of a Murdock grant that helped them to be more effective in the way that they care for animals and work with them. People sometimes say, so what was your best zoo grant and what was your worst one? I'm not sure what the best one would be, but our worst one was the grant we made for the treadmill for the elephant at the Alaska Zoo. That wasn't a great grant. The elephant didn't like the treadmill, nor did it work very well. So we also do wildlife preservation. If you've ever been over to Yellowstone, you may have seen the grizzly and wolf area. That was a Murdock grant work there. The musk ox work that's being done in Alaska. And then you take groups like sustainable development, like the Farmers Conservation Alliance, groups like that, and then a whole host of other groups. In fact, another group that I wanted to be sure and mention, probably you're well aware of them, is a group in Montana, in Bozeman, called Headwater Economics. I see a few of you know about Headwater Economics. It's a great group because what they do is they take information off of all of the major public databases and they work with people in decision makers in communities to really help them to make better informed decisions in the work that they do. So Headwater Economics, if you don't know them, Google them and you can learn more about them. And of course, everyone knows all of the trail, Pacific Coast Trail, the Alaska Trails, Idaho Trails, all the different trails groups we've had the opportunity and privilege to partner with. If you happen to live in Portland and you drive up Burnside, you know the new bridge that goes over that took forever to get in, but it's now turned out and it's beautiful. We were a part of that bridge going in. So that gives you an idea kind of the breadth of the way we think in terms of conservation. And so I know, because in every one of those areas, I know that impacts the work of many of the folks that are in this room. So you can see why I am saying to you, thank you. Now, one of the things that I think is that sometimes it's helpful to just get faces with projects and with organizations. So what I'd like to do is just show you a very short video that would, I think, give you a glimpse into the work of the Murdock Trust, the kind of human ecology, but also the way that then expresses itself in organizations and different states in the region. So if we could, let's roll the video and we'll let you take a look at that. What is the ultimate promise of nonprofit organizations? The ultimate promise is the promise to change lives.
As we work with kids on the res, there's a lot of unique circumstances, from abuses to addictions to a loss of identity and self-value.
With Mending Wings there, it kind of gave me an alternate road to go, gave me a different outlet to go pursue. It brought me to where I am here today in this position of leadership, a place I never would have thought I would have found myself all those years back.
We're not meant for our lives to be spent on ourselves. We're meant for our lives to be given for others.
We have a great group of volunteers that vary in age and interests and backgrounds that help us with everything.
It's been so fulfilling for me. My life wouldn't be the same. I'm very happy after retiring.
5 years after having experienced my own Beauty for Ashes training for the first time, my 86-year-old grandmother went through and also broke the silence of her story. And I felt that generational healing happen from grandmother to granddaughter. The harm that I experienced in my childhood ends here, and it doesn't continue with my children.
I was downtown and trying to find some place to eat, and I talked to somebody and they said that I could get something to eat at the Blanchet House.
Where do you think you would be without Blanchet House?
Probably dead or in prison. The way my life was going. That one hit hard. Because I haven't thought about that in a long time.
This dam has been sitting here blocking fish for 75 years. The fish are still hanging on, the native people are still hanging on.
As we saw that it was actually, the dam was actually going to be removed, there was such a release from my being. We're making the news story, the story that lifts people more. And my grandkids can be proud of Eklutna. I think that's the journey of overcoming our past.
The panic attacks were something that a friend of ours who has a child with Down syndrome had experienced in the beginning of adolescence, and their solution was medication. We would have traded this kind of reality where he's swimming and riding horses for a reality of hospitals and testing. I don't even like to think about it.
Avery, can you tell us what Eagle Mount means to you?
Beautiful.
The reason I do circus at 22 years old is to show people that you have other ways of coping with stuff. I'm not joining gangs, I'm not shooting people, I'm not doing drugs, and I'm not prostituting myself. You have other ways of expressing yourself.
Participating in the arts can be a place where people both express themselves and their ideas, as well as explore who they are as a person.
Each one of our athletes has their own individual story about how their life has been transformed by our programs.
The blindness is one thing, but the other thing is that now we're athletes. And now we're not just observing, now we're winning.
I never ever thought people really cared, like how they care about me, and it touches me. So there's a lot of love in here, a lot.
It's just a little bit humbling to see the work that people do for the benefit of others.
What's being presented in the world is one thing, but what's really happening out in the world is remarkable.
People are willing to serve in the most amazing ways to help their fellow human beings and the worlds in which we live to flourish and thrive.
Tamamas nachnuat chai mamni akishwit. Creator bless these lives.
So you can see why sometimes we say that we are the most fortunate and blessed people in the world to get to see the amazing things that people are doing all across the Pacific Northwest, and really, in some cases, across the country. There are great things happening in our communities, and we know that a lot of it is because of people just like you and the people that you know. If you know of a nonprofit organization that is interested in kind of building its capacity to better serve its mission, that's really what we help do, is build the capacity in technology, facilities, people, programs. That's the mission of the Murdock Trust. And as we kind of have been thinking about that, the kind of closing comment that I would make is this. We had an opportunity a few years ago, a developer came to us that had been working to restore some of the land where the old paper mills had been over on the Columbia River on the Vancouver side. And he basically said to us, because of the recession, he was having a hard time getting anyone that'd be willing to commit to be the first ones in down at the waterfront. And so we sat down with Barry Kane. Some of you probably know Barry and the folks at Graymore, had a lot of conversations about that whole area, things it should look like, and eventually agreed that we would be the first ones to go down there. I don't know if there's any folks that are here from the city of Vancouver. The city of Vancouver did a terrific job at working that and working with Barry and the folks at Graymore, folks in nonprofit organizations and people in the business community as well. And so we actually did, and I would just invite you, if you're ever over on the waterfront, there are now 7 restaurants, 9 buildings. There soon will be 11 restaurants and 4 more buildings going up. There's a hotel going up next to our building, and just invite you to come over and be a part of that. So again, let me just say thank you. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the ways that you serve and volunteer. And thanks for what you do to help communities flourish. I think that is really what the idea when Jack Murdock wrote on the back of that envelope that he had in mind when he said to nurture and enrich the educational and the cultural and social and spiritual life of individuals, families, and communities. So thank you, and thanks for the chance to be with you. Greg, I'll turn it back to you.